I was this close to getting fired, and at the time, I genuinely couldn't figure out what I was doing wrong. I thought I was helping someone, but turns out in this job, doing the right thing could get you pulled into a meeting with your manager and warned, I need to improve my conduct, or else. Looking back on it, there was a huge combination of things that led to that moment, but my undiagnosed ADHD was definitely a key factor. But before we get into it, don't forget to hit that like button, drop a comment, and if you want to, consider subscribing. It helps me a ton. Thank you. So let's talk about the job. And I won't be telling you what the company is or the exact title of the role, just because they're a very big and well-established company, and they already don't like me. But it definitely wasn't my dream job. It was advertised as a very supportive position. The role was designed to help mature students who were studying remotely in getting a whole host of different qualifications, including pre and post-grad. And there is a reason why these people were studying remotely. Many had mental health conditions, physical disabilities, or various other reasons that they couldn't physically attend a university. The job was sold to me as a pastoral supportive figure, someone that these students could reach out to if they were stuck, unsure, or needed signposting. I was there also to help with administrative issues, or just to provide a little bit of encouragement, which I thought was perfect. I always wanted a job where I could support people and make a difference in their lives, even if it is just from a pastoral standpoint. So once I got the job, there was a long training period, and the cracks didn't show on day one. They were more like fissures, canyons, ravines. A couple of hours into the training, already I had some alarm bells starting to ring in my head, because it came very clear very quickly that this role was about sales, and it was all disguised as student support. Basically, each student had to pay per module. It was like a pay-as-you-go qualification essentially, and the company made our role to essentially get them to sign up to the next module, and the next, and the next. And that was the actual KPI. That is how success was measured. How many people did you get to commit to the next module? And if the student hesitated or life got in the way, we were expected to essentially persuade them to keep going. Even when it may not be right for them, we were given a bonus depending on how many people we got through to the next module from our caseload. And the office culture reflected that. Most of the people around me were completely bonus driven. That's literally all they would talk about. Everything was about numbers. The managers would feed us various tactics to help support us to get these people to sign up to the next module. But the biggest problem I had at the time was that I had no other job lined up and I had bills to pay. And it took me a few weeks to actually start sending my CV to other places so I could jump ship essentially. So it didn't take long for the cracks in myself to start showing. At this point in my life, I want to stress that I had never done an office job and I was undiagnosed with ADHD. But in hindsight, the signs were all there. For example, I was never sat at my desk. Not because I was trying to slack off, but because I just couldn't sit in my desk chair. I have to move. Sometimes I would just do a lap of the office. It was a huge office, I want to stress, like massive. Or I would go to the shared office space where things tended to be a lot quieter, and they had beanbags and they were really comfy. And I know this is a classic ADHD symptom. Sometimes you just need a walk. There's no big reason for it. Your body just says move, so you do it. I tended to do it more when I was overwhelmed. I'd also drink a lot of coffee. So once I did a lap, I would go make a coffee. And when I was in my desk chair, I would fidget relentlessly. There were also 2 meetings, and I can remember one quite vividly, unfortunately. It's one of those cringe reels that play in your head as you're trying to sleep. And this is where I interrupted one of the big cheeses whilst they were giving their presentation, not on purpose, but just because I couldn't hold the thought in. I just spoke without thinking, and very swiftly afterwards my manager sent me a very pleasant email, very HR friendly, that basically strongly encouraged me not to do that again. Now all of this might sound small, but it all added up and it made me feel like I wasn't fitting in, like I was doing something wrong. I would question myself, like, why am I like this? Like, why can't I sit in my seat? Why can't I just keep my mouth shut? But as I'm sure you're aware, this started to put an X on the back of my head. But what really tipped me over the edge was something that I'd later learn about, and its name is justice sensitivity. Now, this isn't unique to people with ADHD. I think it's actually fairly common for neurodiverse people, and probably many neurotypical people. But to boil it down to its simplest form, I get deeply uncomfortable when I feel like something is unjust or isn't fair, and this role was full of that. And during our training, I remember one moment crystal clear. It's where one of the managers, who was very confident, who was sharing some of his hidden secret tips. And he basically explained that if a student is going through a bereavement near the time that they are meant to sign up for the next module, this was a perfect opportunity to get them to continue. And the way to do that? Well, it's easy. You tell them that this would make a fantastic distraction from the grief, how you can channel that sadness into something that will better you as a person, regardless of whether that person wants to or not. And at the time, I remember sat there thinking, what? I was so angry, as it's essentially, well, it is taking advantage of a vulnerable person in a vulnerable situation and exploiting them. And I remember looking around the room thinking, come on, this is ridiculous. And everybody else in the room was eating it up, their eyes like gleaming that they had just been given this golden ticket to sales success. And it was really the cutting point where I was like, I am nothing like these people. We share the same job and that's essentially it. And to this day, I wish them nothing but mildly inconvenient misfortunes. May their sleeves always be wet and may both sides of their pillow be warm. But this moment will play a major catalyst into why I nearly got fired, and I'll explain that next. So the moment that everything truly came to a head was over a phone call. A few weeks later, a student rang me and told me very honestly that their life had essentially fallen apart. They were in no state to continue to study, and they wanted to take a break so that they can get back on track. They explained the situation in detail and it was rough. I remember at the time thinking, oof, that's bad. And me being me at the time, I said the most natural thing that I could think of was, take all the time that you need and look after yourself. I reassured them that I'd be here if they needed anything. I'd also mark it on their file that they were taking a break. And this could last up to a good couple of modules. I had to follow up with an email just to explain everything that I did, and they replied truly grateful. And at the time I was like, okay, I've helped this person. This is what I wanted this role to be. There was no chance of me trying to coerce them into signing up for the next module, because the thought of that makes my blood boil. But what I had completely forgotten, and I was very naive to even forget this, or for it to not even register in my brain, that all our calls are recorded. And of course, I was already on many managers' radar, as I was always out of my seat, not showing any favour for reaching any of the targets that were set like everybody else. And the very next day, my boss tapped me on my shoulder and said, "Can we have a quick chat, please?" So of course my bum clenched, my stomach turned, so we sat in this big meeting room, and they started off by saying, "I have done some random screening of calls. Please don't worry, I do this for everybody. It's just for quality assurance." And what followed next was probably one of the worst justifications I had ever heard. He basically told me that I shouldn't have done what I did, that essentially I was a pushover and that I yielded too easy to this student who was going through this really rough life event, and basically stated that the company doesn't make money on people who don't sign up to the next module, and I should know this. And then they went a little further. They said that they had some general concerns about my behaviour. They brought up the interrupting and the fact that I was never at my desk. They mentioned that I didn't have the same spark as my colleagues, and they basically asked, did I still want the role? And of course I had to say yes, because what else could I say? I had no other job lined up and I couldn't afford to leave. And then came the warning. I was told very directly and very crystal clear, but still in a very HR-friendly manner, that they would need to see considerable improvements to my conduct moving forward. It was basically a HR-friendly threat. Basically, buck up or you're gone. And when I left the room, I went back to my desk and powered through the day. But when I got home, I had a pretty rough time. Self-blame kicked in hard. I was like, why am I like this? Why do I interrupt? Like, why can't I just be normal for a day? The typical spiraling thoughts. Of course, I was completely catastrophizing, and I'd love to say that I handled this situation well. I took it on the chin, I got back and I hit that grind. But truth is, I didn't. I had an anxiety attack, followed by a depressive episode. Went to my doctor and they advised that I take 2 weeks off, and I did, and I really needed it. There was nothing left in the tank. The anxiety was from not having another job lined up, and essentially being so bad at something to the point of where you're basically being told that you're going to be fired, made me direct a lot of hatred towards myself, and that's not fair. At this stage, I did start to fire off CVs, But once I got back to work, I experienced the day that made me essentially leave. After my 2 weeks sickness, I got back to work during a training week. I was in a big room with all my colleagues and the managers and the managers' managers. We were told one by one to get up, go to the front of the room and rate each of our managers on a scale from 1 to 10 publicly in front of the managers and the managers' managers. So not only did we have to give a score, but we also had to write our name next to the number that we chose. And surprise, surprise, everybody got almost perfect 10s. At the time, I didn't dare rate anybody lower than an 8, and again, I should stick to my guns, and I should have grown a pair, but I didn't. I marked them an 8. But for me, that was the tipping point. That was on a Friday. I spent the whole weekend writing my resignation letter and sending off hundreds of CVs, and on Monday, I handed in my notice. I knew I couldn't carry on. I knew that I was always going to be on their radar, and it wasn't a matter of if I would be fired, it's a matter of when. But then the strangest thing happened. My manager had to speak with HR and their boss. And the next thing I knew, I was in a room and I was given a proposal. Basically, I leave immediately, like that day, and they give me 4 weeks of pay as a kind gesture. This is very kind of them. And in all honesty, they just needed someone who was a good fit for them. I wasn't the right cog for their machine. That said, there was a bit of a shift in a lot of my managers' attitude post the sickness leave. So that may have had something to do with it. But I think realistically, it was easier for them to get rid of me and hire someone new than it was just to keep me. But there is a happy ending. I eventually found a supportive role that I'm still in now that I love to pieces. And this pastoral support is no longer a thing at the company that I worked for. The company is still around. Like I said, they are humongous. But that particular service that they offer is no longer a thing. And a couple of years later, I got my ADHD diagnosis. And looking back on things, I'm like, oh, a lot of that is because of my ADHD. But I'm adamant now that I'm medicated, that I would be able to tackle an office job much better. But fortunately, at the moment, I don't see myself going back to an office. Knock wood. But I just wanted to show that ADHD can have its downsides and can make things very difficult. But I really appreciate you watching. Again, if you do like the video, do consider liking it, dropping a comment, sharing your experiences with ADHD at work or undiagnosed ADHD at work. It really does help normalize it and help people like myself or other people who are watching the video to feel more at ease that they're not alone. There are people who know how it feels, and that means a lot. Again, a huge thank you for watching. Take care. Goodbye.